I'm going to invite my first guest up here in a minute, and what we're doing, so you don't have to see the toing and froing and the moving of people up and down the stage, is you're going to have another poll everywhere question as this takes place. So your question this time is, how do we make classes more engaging? Okay, as you're finishing that, I'm going to introduce our first guest. So Russell Quaglia, who probably needs no introduction to the majority of you, is the Executive Director of the Quaglia Institute for Student Aspirations. And even by that title, you can sense where he comes from and why he's doing what he's doing. Most recently, he has founded the Teacher Voice and Aspirations International Centre and has written numerous books and presents all over the world, reflecting his passion for ensuring that students, teachers and principals' voices are always heard, honoured and acted upon. So welcome, Russell.
Thank you. Thanks.
And please, a round of applause for Russell. And I want to point out, I mentioned this to you before, but in honour of you, and when I first saw you speak, which was our annual conference in Los Angeles in 2014, and you forced Dr. Gene Carter to take his tie and jacket off. I'm not wearing a tie tonight.
In honor of you,
out of respect for you.
I actually got dressed up for you tonight, so I guess it's pretty even.
It's perfect. Exactly. All right, the first question is, and I've got to admit, it's going to test our eyesight a little bit with this, because we're getting so many responses coming in here. But I want to get your impressions on some of those responses. How do we make classes more engaging? Any of those that stand out?
Yeah, let me just jump at the very first one I can see about connecting them about what's happening in real life. Here's one of the interesting things. So hearing those kids speak earlier, none of that's surprising to any of us. The surprising part for me is that we haven't done anything about it yet, because it would be different for me if I hear these kids talking or the surveys that we do, and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, that's unbelievable. Like, I never knew that. So that's not a surprise to anyone. Yeah. When we get data back from students, I never hear anybody say, wow, that is shocking. I hear other things like, wow, that's not as bad as I thought it was. To questions like, we ask kids, is school boring? 51% say yes, and that's not a surprise to anybody. What surprises me is that it's not a surprise to anybody. So when I look at statements like this, like make learning relevant, about getting kids engaged, here's some interesting data that we have, is 6th graders find school more relevant than 12th graders. And this is from hundreds of thousands of students that we survey every year. So in the 6th grade, average is somewhere around low 70s. It's not great, but it's low to mid 70% of students will say, yeah, I understand why I'm learning what I'm learning in school. By the time they're seniors in high school, we have some high schools that it's 17%. And we wonder why we're losing these kids. And I say to them, it's because we haven't made the connection to these kids about what matters to them. And when I see the most successful schools, the most successful teachers, in the most successful classrooms, it's about letting kids know that they matter to us. Not just to pass a test, obviously, but they matter to us. I know something about my kid. And to me, that's the engagement piece. If we want to get people engaged, we need to first let them know they matter.
Yeah. What's amazing to me is that we had Joe Fathery, call in sick this morning and obviously couldn't make it. And so we were fortunate to have the National State Teachers of the Year here. And that would be, we wanted to make sure we had teacher voice up here as well as student voice. And when I went through the bios of the people who were National State Teachers of the Year, to a person, to a state, the bios were talking about they teach outside the curriculum, they find kids' passion, they form relationships, they're teaching kids, they're not teaching content. Yeah. And all of these things are things that we're holding up as being exemplary, and the students are telling us and the teachers are telling us this is what we need to do, but we're still writing policies which might talk about it, but what truly pushes it to the side.
Yeah, well, it's less messy. I think one of the things I talk a lot about is about relationships. And for me, engagement is like this delicate balance between, if I think of any learning environment, whether it's inside the classroom or outside the classroom, I look at this delicate balance between the teacher, the student, and the content. Okay, so just think of those out there. It's student, teacher, content. The relationship between the teacher and the content is expertise. That's an assumption we should make, is that the teachers are going to be the expert. And that's great. We should have experts in front of these kids. However, that other overlapping piece between the teacher and the student is relationships. So I could be the brightest teacher in the world about my content, but if I don't have a relationship with the student, Am I really connecting with that kid? Do I know what their hopes and dreams are?
Yeah.
And then the overlap between the student and the content is interest. So it's not just making sure we've got the very best teachers that know the content, but it's knowing that we have the very best teachers that know the content, that aren't afraid to have a relationship with a kid, and making sure we're inspiring those kids to get inspired about the content. I don't have to love math to love math class.
Yep.
And I think that's the misnomer we have around engagement. Like, we have to make them loving this stuff. Well, you know what? I don't like math, but I might get through it because my math teachers made it like okay, other than I love math because you're here. But if you weren't, chances are I wouldn't.
Kim Thomas, who was an outstanding math teacher, will be up on stage in a little while, so be careful what you say.
The problem with going first.
Exactly. I asked that first question. I'm going to flick this over, and this has got a few more words on here, but I asked this first question for two reasons. One was to get everybody up and using Poll Everywhere. But the second question is, I asked you, what do you want from this evening's event, as in the people here? And I asked that because isn't this exactly what we should be asking the students when they come into our classes?
Yeah.
You're coming to this event because hopefully it's engaging, hopefully it's meaningful, hopefully it has relevance to you, hopefully it's entertaining enough to keep your attention. So these words, the ideas, inspiration, knowledge, technology, questions, understandings, insights. I'm not sure why the word Orlando is in there, but maybe we can find out a little bit later on.
Right.
Go ahead.
But see, asking that question is the same kind of question. How many teachers, my guess is the teachers in this room do, because they're all national heroes. But how often do we ask students, what do you want from this lesson? What do you want from this class? And they might surprise you and say, the chances they'll say, I don't know. And then the challenge for us becomes, why don't they know? Well, I don't think students really know what they want until we kind of share with them why things are important to learn what they're learning. And it seems to me, and I talk a lot about this around student voice and the incredible importance around student voice, but I even think that has gone sideways a little bit in the sense of we can't assume students have a voice. It's not a natural way of being. It should be, but it's not. So we say, well, I have a committee of students that I meet with periodically. I'm like, yeah, whatever. But the way I look at voice is this, for students and teachers, quite frankly, it's not just about sharing what they're thinking. That's an opinion, and people should share their opinions. But when we're talking around voice, and we're talking about getting kids engaged in the classroom, I want to know what matters to you. I want to know what you're thinking, how I can improve this. But here's the piece that I think is more important. What are you going to do as a student to take responsibility to make this class engaging? I think sometimes we have this little bit ass backwards. See, I couldn't say ass before in Washington, but now I can with Trump. But it's like, it's kind of ass backwards. You just wait. But it's a little bit backwards because it's always about us trying to do something for the students rather than show me some responsibility. I see teacher surveys all the time, these teacher assessment tools that are out there now that we're assessing teachers. Those are fine, except I want a question that asks the kids, do you come to class prepared to learn? And that's the questions we ask. You're shocked at how many kids, over half, say, nope, I don't come class prepared to learn. We ask kids, do you respect other students' opinions? Nope, over half say I don't. So that's not a teacher issue, it's a kid issue. When I'm working with kids and say, oh man, I'm gonna go to social studies. This social studies teacher is so boring. And I look at the kids, I'm like, whose fault is that? Well, this is the teacher, they're brutal. I'm like, no, there's 30 of you, this one of them. Kidnap them, put them in the trunk, do something, but stop whining. We're in this kind of whine mode about, oh man, my teacher's boring, teachers don't care about me, the school doesn't care. No, seriously, what are you doing about it? Take some responsibility.
I'll agree with the no whining, and I'll agree with the taking responsibility, but wouldn't you say that we've established systems, though, in many of our schools that don't listen to students? Like you're the exception. You're going around to schools and giving a student survey. That, on its own, is an exception. And we also have too many schools that might actually be asking the students, but they're doing it as a tokenistic gesture. They're saying, okay, check, we've asked the students, let's move on. Totally We're going to keep doing things, which in a way is more harmful than not asking, I think.
I totally agree.
If you're going to actually ask the students their opinion or ask teachers their opinion and you don't follow through with it, then it becomes a meaningless action. So don't we have systems that play into students not being empowered or active?
again, I think there's two reasons for that. From what we've been finding in the work is that we're perceiving students as the problem, not the potential. So as soon as we get out of this mindset that these kids are problems, not the potential, we're always going to be having this battle. So that bothers me from day one. I'm just like, no, these kids are the potential, they're not the problem. And I think the other piece that drives, quite frankly, education, where we are in America and in other countries as well, but it's really profound here, is that our system is grounded, and this is just going to make people squirrely, but it's grounded in testing and accountability. And we will never have engaged students until we move from testing and accountability to one of trust and responsibility. And people say, oh, that can't be. Well, it has to be. We're going to be having this conversation 10 years from now. So the challenge for us to get engaged students is, what do we do in our classrooms to move from this notion of testing and accountability, which is real, I get that, but instead of that being our focus, what's driving us? How about trust and responsibility? And one of the ways that we try to get at it, because the big thing in the middle of this thing is ideas, is listening to student voice. Yeah. What do they have to say? Why are they telling us that? And Sean, to your point, I see so many schools doing surveys, which isn't a bad thing because we have our own survey. But here's the thing that bothers me. We get survey data back from students, and what do? We develop an action plan with not a whole lot of reflection. I want to get schools to take surveys. I want them to get survey data back and say, this doesn't make any sense to me. Why are the kids saying this? For example, do you know 48% of the kids in this country say, my teacher doesn't care if I show up for class? We're worried about engaging kids. We're worried about kids meeting AYP and all these other things. Half the kids in this country don't think we care if they even show up. So I get data like that doesn't make sense to districts and schools. I'm saying, don't develop an action plan. Figure out why the kids are saying that. Reflect. Figure out what you can live with and what you can't live with. Go, instead of going from data to action, go from data, understanding what that data means, and then look at your vision of your school. And so I try to talk about voice and vision. It's not just having kids and teachers have a voice, but how do you connect that voice to the vision of the school? I think the stuff, Quaglia, that you're doing, you're talking about, well, not yet, but I know you will because I've done my homework, is this notion for you. It's not about collecting data. It's about, if that data is meaningless unless you connect it to the vision of where the school's doing. If not, it's another survey, and a monkey can fill out an opinion survey. This is like, what does that opinion mean, and what are students going to be responsible for? Yeah. Wow, that was like a little rant there, sorry. Whew.
It was engaging, though.
Yeah,
it was engaging.
To me.
Exactly.
To me, it was I was amazing. All right. I should come right back.
We're going to give you a little bit more of your own words now. So these are, I went back and did a little bit of my homework as well. And you wrote these, so you should know what they are. Here are a series of tweets that you've put out over the last couple of months, and I'm going to give you a little bit of choice about which one you want to talk about or highlight. First one talks about 93% of students believe they can be successful, and have you created a classroom where all students believe they can achieve. Other one is only 44% of students say teachers make school an exciting place to learn. Students who are engaged in school are 16 times more likely to be academically motivated. 88% of students want to do their best at school, and how can teachers help them? And what about that remaining 12%? Getting back to your point previously. And did you know that when teachers have a voice, they are 4 times more likely to believe they make a difference? And lastly, when teachers have a voice, they're 3 times more likely to ensure that students have a voice. So I'm going to let you pick one of those and go on a second rant.
Wow, that's difficult because they're all pretty insightful. I'll tell you what, I'll jump at the first one, or the last one first, and then we can get to the others quickly. But this is really interesting to us. One of the things that we found with the most engaged schools that we were working in, where students were engaged, and I mean meaningfully engaged. They weren't like jumping for joy all the time, but it was like they knew what they were learning and why. And I was trying to figure out, why do some schools promote student voice and have student voice with engaged students and others don't? And what we learned from doing more research was that the schools that promote student voice, that promote this real sense of engagement, teachers felt they had a voice. Yeah. They felt the sense of self-worth. They felt like they were engaged. They, above all, had a sense of purpose. So one of the data points in there is when, students are engaged, they're exponentially more academically motivated to learn. When students have purpose, they're 18 times more likely to learn. And the thing about purpose, and one of the students said it up there, it's not about asking me what I want to be, because it's another inane question we ask kids. But who do you want to become? What kind of person do you want to be? And people say, well, you know, I don't have time for that. It's all about their hopes and dreams. And I always tell people, you don't have time not to ask these kids hopes and dreams. Yeah. That's what we're about. And so what's the difference there? The difference is that the students that are more engaged realize that they matter. They matter to me as a teacher. They matter to themselves for each other. And what's fascinating to me, and again, this is another data point, not to bore you with data, but 51% of the students in this country tell us, this is 6th grades through 12th grade, do not think teachers know their name.
That's scary.
Yeah,
That's
over
scary.
half, they don't know their name. My daughter, who's in high school now, says, you know, we're yapping about this stuff because it comes up periodically at dinner. And she goes, Dad, 3 of my teachers don't know my name. And I say, of course they know your name. How could they not know your name? They grade you. They know your name. And she's not a dumb kid. She goes, I don't know how they did that. And it's like, no, seriously. Yeah. They honestly don't think teachers know the name. And this is why. How often do we call kids by their name? Yeah. No, it's like, hey, it's good to see you all. No, it isn't. No, I love teachers that say, hey, it's good to have most of you here, but if that back row didn't show up today, chances are my day would be better. And then all of a sudden you call them out and say, why did you just say that? Well, because I want to know why you're in this classroom. Are you here because you have to be here, or you're taking up space, or are you ready to make a difference? Yeah. It's this notion of conversations to me. It's about voice. It's about building relationships that we're not taking the time to do because we don't know how to yet. And I don't think in education we think it's cool about relationships yet. We always yap about it, but we don't believe it yet.
You know what's crazy? We do a whole child podcast every month. We've been doing it every month since 2009, talking about every topic under the rainbow in terms of education, from differentiation to anti-truancy to alcohol, tobacco, other drugs to student hope and well-being, everything. The most common theme that comes up, no matter what topic we are talking about, is relationships.
Right.
Because if you don't connect with the students, know who your students are, then how can you craft the curriculum? How can you plan the lessons that's going to make it meaningful to them and engaging to them? It comes up every single time. I don't believe there's a silver bullet in education, but the closest thing we have is relationships.
Right, and I think relationships is driven by the sense of voice. Here's the issue, though, relationships. So we always talk about it, and we always know it's important. As a matter of fact, you look at John Hattie's work with effect size, it's 0.72. Now, not to bore you with all these effect size kinds of things, but there's nothing higher. We know relationships work, but we're still afraid of it. Yep. Yet, our entire life is predicated on relationships. I flew in here on Delta. 2 days later, I get a survey from Delta. Just like if you go to a restaurant, you get a survey, how is your satisfaction? And Delta, hotels, are they asking you about the flight? Well, yeah, but what are they really asking you about? They're asking you about the relationship that you might have with the flight attendant. Were they nice? When I'm doing the survey on Delta, how was your flight? I don't say, oh, it was great, we took off and we landed, whew, winner. No, that's an assumption. That is an assumption. You think of the best flights you've had. Granted, they probably took off on time, that's a plus. But your best flights are the ones where the flight attendant is like a normal human being. Our worst flights are when just everybody's angry. That's about relationships. When you get surveys from hotels, yeah, your room needs to be clean. That's the given. But what do they present all the time? Were you welcomed? Did they show care? Did people say good morning to you when they saw you? That's about relationships. Restaurants. How many times do we go to restaurants? This is like one of the greatest restaurant places on the planet, DC. You could have a bad meal, but have the greatest server, and my chances are you might go back and give it another chance. Yep. You could have the greatest meal ever and have someone make you feel really just kind of out of place and not comfortable. You'll never go back there. It's the same thing in the classroom. The kids want to go back to classrooms where they feel comfortable, where people care about them, where there is a relationship. And we've got to get over the fact that we've got to make this relationship is like the 13-letter F word in education. I don't even know if there's 13 letters, but that would be pretty close. But think about that. Why don't we say it? Why don't we live it? My guess is every teacher of the year in this room tonight is about relationships. Not solely, because remember, that's part of that triad. You can have the best relationships in the world, but if you don't know the content or these kids aren't engaged or have interest, well, now you're like an old person with a young person friend, like whatever. But it's that combination of them all. You got to have relationships, you got to have the content expertise, and you got to have the interest. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to be off here pretty soon, aren't I? I'm getting like, oh my God.
You get to stay the whole time, don't you worry.
Yeah, well, thanks.
Right. And on that point, we're going to we could talk all night about this. You know, everything you said, I kept on thinking, oh, that reminds me of a study we did back in California. That reminds me of this. That reminds me of a story that we had in Oakland. We went to a school. And the relationships matter, and I think that what gets me is that teachers know it inherently in their gut.
Totally. Yep.
Even if they haven't been taught it or been told it, or even if they haven't been patted on the back for it in the last 10 years in this country. They know. You ask a teacher, describe your best classroom, what happened? And it's the ones where they know the students, they know what makes them tick, and they found something meaningful to connect them during that lesson.
Just need to make kids know that they matter.
Exactly.